Dropping out of school is a sign of a person with no effort or common sense. That's how my eldest son's wife looks down on us, calling my husband and me uneducated. Does she really think all dropouts are like that? Who is really the one without effort or common sense? I clenched my trembling, angry hands and decided to cut ties with her. My name is Kathleen. Despite the ups and downs, I'm about to turn 75. Overall, I've had a happy life. But there's been one problem. It's the presence of my eldest son's wife. I married Tom, and we were blessed with 2 sons. Mike, our eldest son, turned out to be kind and gentle, while our younger son, Bob, was a bit of a handful. Bob often got into fights with classmates and caused us quite a bit of worry with frequent calls from the school. But even Bob settled down after graduating from college and becoming a working adult. He married Sally, a calm woman who becomes quite intimidating when angry. Sally was the perfect match to handle Bob, who still had his mischievous nature. Indeed, after marrying, Bob voluntarily cut back on nights out with his male friends and started helping with house chores, showing his care for Sally. Seeing this change, I thought to myself how much Bob had grown up. The issue was with Mike. A little after Bob's wedding, Mike also got married. She was Mary, a woman with a somewhat stern look around her eyes. Apparently, her family background was quite elite, with a sister who's a doctor and relatives in politics. However, Mary herself wasn't a graduate of any prestigious university and worked as an office worker in a private company, quite an ordinary person. She met Mike, a graduate of a modest technical college, through work. Despite her initially stern appearance, she turned out to be a friendly and nice woman, getting along well with us. This was the case until she became pregnant. When Mary found out she was expecting their first child, she immediately called to inform us. We were overjoyed at the prospect of another grandchild, having already celebrated the arrival of Bob's first child. But Mary's call wasn't just to share the happy news of her pregnancy. I wanted to inform you and Kathleen that I'm pregnant. Really? That's wonderful, Mary. Take care of yourself, and remember you can always rely on us if you need anything. Thank you. Actually, Kathleen, I wanted to discuss something. What is it? Is it true that you and Tom dropped out of school? Uh-huh. Mary mentioned that during her pregnancy announcement, her parents asked her about the background of Mike's parents. By the way, what's the background of Mike's parents? She said she was asked by her mom. Until then, Mary hadn't really thought about our educational background or our family standard of living. It was the first time she had asked our son about it. According to her, our son told her, "My parents dropped out and helped with the family business." He said that he heard that. As I mentioned before, Mary's family is elite. There are no dropouts among them. Therefore, in Mary's mind, dropping out had a very negative connotation. To her, it seemed equivalent to being ambitionless and incompetent. When I honestly responded, yes, that's right. Then Mary said, "I see. Understood." She replied in a somber tone and abruptly ended the call. It might have shocked her to hear about an unfamiliar educational background, but Mary's spouse is not me. It's my son. Until then, I thought our educational background wouldn't matter to the two of them. A while later, we found out the gender of Mike's baby. It was a boy. The joy of expecting a grandchild was just as immense as when we had our first grandchild. Tom and I, getting carried away, gathered cute baby clothes and sent them to Mike's place. Mike expressed his thanks, and we thought they were pleased. However, during a visit before the baby's birth, Mary made an astonishing request. "We are a bit overwhelmed with all these clothes. Could you instead send educational toys that help with the child's brain development?" Tom and I were taken aback, as we weren't very familiar with the concept of educational toys at the time. "I grew up feeling inadequate at home, so I want to raise this child properly. Please, can you help with that?" Her polite request made us feel as though we had done something wrong, but it also left us wondering. Isn't it customary to express gratitude for baby clothes? We felt a bit uneasy, but we thought maybe Mary was just stressed before the birth. I remembered having similar feelings myself. We decided it was best to ask what they needed before sending anything next time. But that night, as I passed by Mary and my son's room, I heard such an exchange through the door. "Hey, Can't you do something about Kathleen and the others? I'm worried about our child's future if it stays this way. But we can't change our educational background now. But the early years are crucial. I mean, no offense. But being influenced by dropouts like Tom and Kathleen might not be good for the child, right? I don't think that's going to be a problem. You can be sure I want to enroll our child in a private kindergarten. After that, it's Harvard University. But with dropouts like Kathleen and the others, I'm worried about the influence on exams and such. My brother and I were raised freely. We might be told it's cruel to focus only on studies. See, that's what I mean. That's not okay. If you raise them too freely, they'll end up like me, called a failure. I want to prove them wrong with this child. A failure? That's not true. The early years are so important, and having grandparents who are dropouts, I'm already worried about the child's future. It would be fine if they don't interfere with parenting. I was stunned to overhear such a conversation. I knew from my son that Mary was looked down upon for her educational background by her own family, but to think she was planning to give our grandchild an elite education just to prove her family wrong. Children are not extensions of their parents. They have their own lives. It's important to provide a good education, but what matters most is whether the child wants it or not. And nowadays, as the number of children decreases, society is moving from being credential-oriented to skill-oriented. Focusing solely on academic credentials seemed somewhat nonsensical. And this isn't just because I'm a dropout myself. I wondered if making a child study all the time from a young age was really the best approach. This is my grandchild, not my child. How much should I intervene? I chose not to interrupt the heated conversation between my son and his wife. I shared this incident with Tom and suddenly hinted our concerns to our son alone, without Mary. I ended up hearing it that night. I decided to bring up the matter, although I thought it might be meddling. We were still concerned about our grandchild's future and the behind-the-scenes dynamics between our daughter-in-law and son that we had inadvertently witnessed. However, Mike just said, "Mary is having a tough time. Try to understand." It seemed he was trying to harmonize the family by accepting Mary's opinion, even though it felt somewhat different from our more laid-back parenting style. Needless to say, I was somewhat disappointed in my son for being completely under Mary's thumb. I'd always thought of him as a kind son, but to become so submissive upon marriage. After some time, Mary safely gave birth to their first child. Eager to see our grandchild, Tom and I went for a visit. Unbelievably, we were the only ones denied visitation. Both Mary's parents were allowed to see them, as was Bob's family. Although we were told it was because Mary wasn't feeling well after giving birth, I couldn't help but feel suspicious because of our previous conversations. I couldn't help but wonder if we were being denied visitation because we are grandparents who dropped out. I couldn't help but doubt it. However, we couldn't just force our way in. Despite being denied visitation, accepting that it was for Mary's health, we avoided visiting her during her hospital stay. After she was discharged, we decided to visit Mike's home with a gift for the baby. But then, "I'm sorry, but Kathleen and you cannot enter our house." Mary stood firmly at the front door, her tense eyes making it clear that we were not allowed inside. I have been thinking about it a lot, what kind of environment I should provide for my child. But no matter how I think about it, grandparents who are dropouts will only be a source of shame for this child's future. Excuse me, dropouts are nothing but people who lack effort and common sense. Having such grandparents constantly around would be a bad influence. That's why I absolutely will not let this child meet you. I was stunned to think she would go as far as to refuse to let us meet our grandchild. She kept mentioning dropouts, but I wonder if a parent fixated on educational backgrounds isn't the bad influence. As we stood there trembling with anger, Mary continued, "However, it's a fact that you are this child's grandparents. Rest assured, we'll accept gifts for the birth and school entrance, but please no items. Tom and Kathleen lack taste. Gifts from less intelligent people end up as garbage, so just give money. I won't tell the child it's from you." In essence, she just wanted the money. Was it the shock of being deprived of the joy of meeting our grandchild? Or was it the despair that Mike said nothing about the situation? Furious emotions were swirling inside me, and I didn't know how to properly express them. From the back of the room, I could hear the joyful laughter of Mary's parents playing with the child. This only agitated our feelings further in a bad way. Tears filled my eyes as I struggled to hold them back, and Tom's face turned red with anger. We quietly took each other's hands. Resolute. Understood. Then it's a disconnection. When Tom said this, Mike looked at us in shock, while Mary smiled. If that's the case, then it can't be helped, she said. After that, Mike tried to contact us several times, but we ignored him. Even if he wanted us to reconcile with his wife, it was impossible. It wasn't a matter of forgiveness. Simply, Mary's way of thinking and our compatibility were too different. Reconciling would only lead to the same problems. Gradually, Mike's attempts to reach out decreased, and all our affection was poured into Bob's family and their child. Bob's son, Joe, was a child who, unusually for these times, loved his grandparents dearly. This was because Bob worked in construction and his wife Sally was a nursery teacher. Both were working parents, and Tom and I were practically living with Bob's family, helping to raise Joe. To be clear, it wasn't that Sally and Bob had abandoned their parenting duties to us. Sally had considered quitting her dream job as a nursery teacher for childcare, so we suggested living together part-time. On the day Sally was absent, either Tom or I, or both of us, would go to Bob's house from morning till night to take care of our grandchild. 20 years had passed, and in the blink of an eye, our grandchild had grown up, graduated from university, and became a working adult. We organized a modest home party to celebrate our grandchild's independence and birthday. And that's when the incident happened. It was towards the end of the party, as everyone was enjoying wine, cake, and occasionally some fries. My grandson casually said, "After something sweet, you always crave something salty, right?" Just then, ding dong, ding dong, ding dong. The intercom rang loudly. I checked the monitor, and to my surprise, there stood Mary, whom we had cut ties with. Her appearing out of the blue, had she discovered the truth? As I wondered what to do about the appearance of this person who could ruin the whole party, I looked at Tom and Bob, and they all nodded in agreement. It seemed okay to respond. I nodded back at everyone and decided to speak with Mary. Not wanting to open the door, I spoke through the monitor. "What do you want?" To this, Mary, furious, replied, "You've been deceiving us." She was very furious. Apparently, Mary had found out the truth that we had kept silent. I vowed in my heart to return the humiliation she had given us twice over. "Don't shout such unpleasant things at the front door. What deception are you talking about?" I heard from Mike that Joe became a doctor and that Tom was teaching him. How can dropouts educate a child to become a doctor? Why did you lie? Are you misunderstanding something? The dropout part is true, and we never taught Joe. What Tom's dream was to be a teacher, but his family had too many children. As the youngest, there wasn't enough money for him to go to high school, so he reluctantly helped on the farm. That's why the dropout part is true. Maybe you misunderstood that he studied on his own after becoming an adult. I continued. Tom often taught Bob's son through handmade games in math and English. It wasn't formal teaching, but more like educational play. They were just playing freely. Plus, Joe was a helpful child. When I cooked, he would stay by my side, which led him to get interested in wild plants. From there, he showed interest in herbal medicine, drugs, the human body, and eventually aspired to be a doctor. Then, thanks to his free upbringing, he developed various interests and ended up on an elite path by chance. But it wasn't forced, which is probably why his academic performance never suffered. He must have enjoyed studying, and that's why he got into Harvard University on his first try. My sister, an Oberon, also helped him with his studies. We didn't mention it, but I also helped with a family business for the same reasons as Tom. In our times, financial reasons or family circumstances often led to unavoidable dropouts. Listening to my explanation about the various reasons for dropping out, Mary's face twisted and turned pale. "Why didn't you tell me this when my child was born? Then my child wouldn't have ended up a failure. My child was rejected from safety schools and ended up postponing college. Doesn't it hurt you to abandon your grandchild?" I don't understand. You were the one who unilaterally rejected us without listening to our side, weren't you? We wanted to cherish our grandchild, but it was you who deprived the child of grandparents and forced them onto a difficult path. Normally, when you hear dropout, you think of someone incapable and incompetent, right? You have such a narrow view. There are many dropouts out there who have reached the top through their abilities. It's not too late. I apologize. Could you please oversee my son's studies? If he doesn't get into a famous university next year, I can't face my family. Is that to protect your own reputation? Does your child genuinely enjoy studying and want to go to that university, or are they actually sending out an SOS wanting something different? Mary fell silent with a strained face at my questions. It seemed I had hit the mark. Your parenting has cornered your child. You hated being called a failure yourself, so why can't you accept your child as they are? Your child is not your accessory. As I spoke sternly, Tom chimed in from behind. That's right. If you didn't want to be seen as a failure, you should have proved yourself to your family through your own efforts. But instead, you're trying to make your child walk the path you couldn't. That's wrong. Parents should first show their own path. Don't force your child to do what you couldn't. Your child's life is theirs, not yours. Mary started to cry, unable to hold back any longer. But I had no choice. I wanted to have fun when I was young. Sure, my sister who became a doctor always studied, but that's because she was smart and it paid off. As soon as I slacked off a bit, I was done for. It's natural to focus on having fun, right? I was appalled. We had thought all along that Mary had always loved studying, but just didn't get good results, which led to her family looking down on her. But from this conversation, it seemed she herself had neglected to put in the effort. To not exert effort, to yearn for success, and then upon failing, to force one's unfulfilled life onto a child. It's the worst kind of story. There is no room for sympathy. Please look after my child's studies, Mary started pleading again. It seemed like it might be a good idea for Mary to start learning as a person even now. I'm sorry, but we aren't heartless. Even though we have cut ties, we still love our grandchild. However, we can't supervise a student's studies. What do you mean, student? Mary looked astonished. She couldn't see it through the monitor, but Tom and I smiled back. This autumn, we are becoming university students. Our children and grandchildren have all grown up. It took time balancing it with parenting, but we are finally starting our own life. We will be busy with our own studies, so we can't afford to look after someone else's. Since it's an important party, could you please leave? At my words, Mary stood there stunned, seemingly no longer hearing what was said. Tom and I quietly turned off the monitor and returned to the joyful party. I thought I heard Mary screaming at the ender. But well, never mind. After that day, it seemed to trigger a family discussion in Mike's household. Mike asked his child, "Do you really want to go to university?" It turns out the child had lost motivation because they wanted to pursue something else, but Mary was pushing for a law career. Changing the direction of study paid off, and the next year the child successfully got into university and later pursued their dream in IT. Needless to say, I was relieved to know that the grandchild didn't end up unhappy. On the other hand, Mary, shocked to learn that her child disliked her approach to education, proposed a divorce to Mike. Mary seemed to have reflected on her failure as a mother. Apparently, the grandchild was under stress from studies, and Mary hadn't even noticed. Calling herself a failure as a mother was indeed accurate. Mike, having grown tired of Mary's overzealousness in education over the years, readily accepted her divorce proposal. The couple divorced once their child became independent. Mary, not feeling up to returning to her parents' home, is currently working under a young boss, being strictly supervised due to her long break from the workforce as a full-time homemaker. She apparently has a significant gap in her skills, struggling even with computers, and her work isn't going well. She often gets scolded at work and sometimes vents her frustration to her ex-husband Mike, though it seems he no longer pays her much attention. Mike, apologizing to us before the divorce, said, "I'm not blaming it on my youth, but I'm ashamed of my inability to make sound decisions. A son is always a son regardless of the situation, and we as his parents recognized that the problem at that time was with Mary. We had cut ties with Mary, who was our son's wife, but never intended to sever our bond with Mike, our eldest son. Mike was desperately trying to protect his first ever family. we thought it best to show understanding with the wisdom of our age. As Bob's children and Mike's children each begin to walk their own paths, what about us, you might ask? Tom, now 75, graduated from university and became a home-based IT engineer. His main job is creating and publishing educational games for children. While I can't be a teacher at this age, Tom is very happy that he can indirectly contribute to children's education. As for me, I studied nutrition in college and became a cook. In fact, I've published a few books. My popular dishes mainly include local cuisine and warm home-cooked meals like those made by a country mother with her own twist. Having found a job that we can do even after retirement, we are truly living our second life to the fullest. Every day is so much fun. Whether we are dropouts or even uneducated, we believe that with effort, any path can be forged. As long as we believe in ourselves, happy days are ahead. From now on, Tom and I plan to live a life so that in our final moments we can proudly say it was the best life. We intend to continue walking a life that allows us